a day to go fishing. And catch the sunset in the hills. And dream of my yesterdays and tomorrows. And hope that you'll be with me still. I saw a butterfly and I named it after you. Your name has such a pleasant sound. Love is all around and all I see is you. I must be in a good place now. I must be in a good place now.
Talk among yourselves. What the hell is going on? No, they're going to point at me because it's being live streamed. So we're starting on time, and Julie's going to point at me. Point at me. Thank you all for coming tonight to the National Public Housing Museum. For how many of you is this your first visit to the museum? Hooray. Well, I hope you come back again and again. And when you come, you should know we're just over a year old in this museum. It's a unique institution. It kind of not only documents the history of public housing, but it doesn't do it in a nostalgic way. It does it in a way that points to the reality that housing should be and really is a human right, and that everyone has a right to a place to call home. And that's what this place stands for, and that's what it organizes around. So I hope you come back, and when you come back, go to the second floor to the historic apartment exhibit, where you will see an exhibit that was co-written and narrated by Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor about redlining, and it's an extraordinary exhibit. So you have to make a return trip just to see that and see a lot more. There's a lot here, and it's rich and deep. So again, thank you for coming, and do come again. So here we are at the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and a mixed and contradictory document and moment and celebration. For me, I was thinking back to the 200th anniversary because I was 32 years old in 1976, and we had an underground press. No, really, it was underground. It was called Red Dragon Press, and we printed a poster on the 200th anniversary, and it was a picture, a contemporary picture, of a white supremacist mob using an American flag to beat a black man in downtown Boston. And the caption we put on it was, 200 years is enough. And now it's 250 years, and I kind of feel, similarly, I feel like there's nothing more appropriate than having a conversation tonight about 250 years of resistance. And that's the theme of the evening. Tomorrow I will post, as I always do, Frederick Douglass's famous speech with the famous line, "What to the slave is your 4th of July?" And I will also post some words from John Brown, because I'm part of a group called John Brown Lives. I'm wearing my bracelet. And I urge you, among other historic sites, to go see up near Lake Placid, John Brown's farmhouse, which is now a New York State site, and where John Brown and his family are buried. But John Brown also had some choice words for slavery. And you may know that Abraham Lincoln, 5 years after John Brown was executed, 4 years after, famously said, "The Civil War is John Brown's raid on a massive scale." And there's truth to that. So I'm thinking tonight about Frederick Douglass and John Brown. But I'm also thinking about Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor and Brian Jones, who we are very, very fortunate to have here tonight to talk about 250 years of resistance. Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, as many of you know, is the Hughes Rogers Professor of African American Studies at Princeton and the co-founder of Hammer and Hope. That's a journal you should know about. You should Google it when you get home, and you should subscribe. It's a very important journal of thought and criticism and politics and culture. So Hammer and Hope, keep that in your mind. Keeanga is the author of many books, including From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation and How We Get Free, Black Feminism, and the Combahee River Collective. I wanted to read you just a couple of sentences from her introduction to the Combahee River Collection book. She ends her introduction by saying, "In the last several years, Black feminism has reemerged as the analytical framework for the activist response to the oppression of trans women of color, the fight for reproductive rights, and of course, the movement against police abuse and violence. The most visible organizations and activists to the Black Lives Matter movement speak openly about how Black feminism shapes their politics and their strategies today. The interviews compiled in this book are an attempt to show how these politics remain historically vibrant and relevant to the struggles of today. We talk about Black feminism because Black women are still not free." That's how she ends the introduction to her lovely, amazing book, How We Get Free. Brian Jones is an educator, an author, an organizer, an activist, and he served as the inaugural director of the Center for Educators in Schools at the New York Public Library, associate director of education at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. Brian is a founding board member and contributing artist to the organization Voices of a People's History, and the author of two really extraordinary books, The Tuskegee Student Uprising, A History, which I recommend highly, and Black History is for Everyone, his latest book. And I'm going to read the last few words of Brian Jones's Black History is for Everyone. Black people can take pride in moments of daring action and radical dreaming, but they're not for Black people alone. These dreams often transgress and transcend racial and national boundaries. They're a gift to all of us if we're willing to receive them. With all of our flaws, with all of our limitations, and with our eyes wide open, we must continue to read, to write, and to dream. Black history is for everyone. Please welcome Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor and Brian Jones.
Thank you so much, Bill, for that introduction. I want to start tonight. It feels appropriate to do what you mentioned, actually, which is to start with that speech by Frederick Douglass. Can you hear me? Maybe I can move this up a little higher. Is that better? Salud. And I'm going to read a little bit just to introduce the speech and set the scene for it, for those who don't know where and when Frederick Douglass gave this speech. In the summer of 1852, I'm Brian Jones. In the summer of 1852, 600, mostly white people, gathered in Corinthian Hall, Rochester, New York's premier lecture arena. The speaker they came to hear was Frederick Douglass, who liberated himself from enslavement 14 years earlier, taught himself to read and write, started a newspaper, and became one of the nation's most well-known and influential persons. The date was the 5th of July, but the occasion was the 4th of July, the nation's birthday. He who could address this audience without a quailing sensation, Douglass began with false modesty, has stronger nerves than I have. Douglass continued to deliver a 32-page soliloquy, which, as planned, he later republished in his newspaper and also sold separately as a pamphlet. His conclusion was a scathing indictment, seething with outrage at a nation that celebrated its founding as a righteous blow against tyranny and oppression while simultaneously holding millions of people in chains. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Please welcome Keeanga-Yamahtta.
That was great, Brian. Happy 4th. Happy 4th. Woo! USA, USA.
First of all, thanks again to the National Public Housing Museum. This is such a beautiful space, incredible. Thank you for having us. Thank you to everyone watching at home or later.
We're going to talk, so
yeah,
let's talk.
Let's talk. Well, you know, Frederick Douglass, that was 175 years ago. He gave that speech. Mm-hmm. Does it still matter? Are we guilty of practices more shocking and bloody?
Oh my God. Could it matter more? I think, that was obviously, I think, intended to sort of draw attention to the contradiction, right, of American freedom and the, brutality and insanity of American slavery. And, there's always a way in which today that there are those who would kind of wind the story of emancipation and freedom for Black people, a Black president,
we fixed
more
it.
Black elected officials than any other period, than any other period of time in American history, as a kind of renunciation of that history and a vindication of the American project from slavery to freedom. But I think in some ways, maybe it's even worse now because of in that speech, the U.S. was still its kind of own entity unto itself, a nation really in formation. And at this point, it's the most powerful nation on earth, and yet still is bombing countries for we don't know why. Maybe sport, Iran, right? $300 billion in a matter of weeks. But then also when you look at the kind of emphasis that Douglass was making on the barbarity of the inner war, right? What the U.S. does within its own borders to people who come here in search of a better life, or for people who live here, people who are citizens, that you have this country with tremendous wealth and resources, enough so that it can just set $300 billion on fire to go murder people and to destroy their housing, while at the same time having people in this country who are hungry or who don't have a secure place to live, or those are the worst case scenarios, or who just have worked terrible jobs and live terrible lives because everything is a struggle in this country. And so in some ways, it's almost even worse because there's so much more wealth, there's so many more resources that it should be that much easier. And yet, it's that much harder for everyone. And so over the last, just as an example of this, really since maybe the early aughts, 2010 to now, for working class people, Black, white, and Latino, their life expectancy, with the exception, I think, of the last year, has gone into reverse, right? Meaning that people are living shorter lives. This doesn't happen in the developed world. This is actually unprecedented, where in a so-called developed first world nation, that life expectancy has gone into reverse. And if you think about that, while a week ago, the press was making breaking news, stopped the presses to announce Elon Musk, that demon, as the world's first trillionaire, and not even drawing any kind of, sense of a contradiction between the reverse of life expectancy, the hardship that millions of people in this country endure, that this country imposes on tens of millions of people outside of its borders, and a fucking trillionaire. And then this country has more billionaires than any other place on earth, 962. And it's a country that in the last couple of years, because of the stock market and asset possession, is responsible for half of the millionaires that exist in the world. And so you have this grotesque inequality of the richest and wealthiest people, and then not the poorest people. And you compare people's lives to those who live in the global south, that might tell a different story. But we're not comparing their lives to people who live in the global south. We're comparing their lives to maybe their parents or maybe to their grandparents. And that puts the contrast in the question of progress. It makes it a joke. The sense that over time things have gotten better. And so I think that Douglass's outrage about the hypocrisy of the American experiment in its infancy has been made more emphatic, that this is a hypocritical, despotic, just awful place for those who are at the bottom.
Yeah. Let me raise this mic up a little bit. But let me ask you.
Let me ask you.
Oh, geez.
This is not an interview.
What do you want to ask me?
What are your thoughts?
Well, I remember when I first started working with an organization, Voices of a People's History of the United States, and we would perform those, speeches like this, like radical speeches from U.S. history, like the Douglass speech. And I started noticing that people would reprise the speech, take the text of it, and on social media they would swap out the word slave. And they would say, like, what to the child separated from their parents at the border is your 4th of July? And there's just so many swaps you could make with somebody who might feel that the 4th of July is not theirs in the way that Douglass. And so it seems to me that there's something there. I guess a thing that I was hoping we would talk about, it's not an interview, but the funny thing is like where Douglass lands, because he goes from being this fiery critic of the nation. I don't want to say he flips, but he changes. I mean, when slavery is abolished, he has a different view. And his view is, the nation has been reborn now. Now this is a nation that stands for kind of radical political equality. And he's patriotic, I think we have to say. And so...
Which is why the Republicans
love him.
Parts of Frederick Douglass, yeah.
But I guess that's the thing that I'm thinking about. We're here because of this occasion. Like, it's July 3rd. And, everybody except people working at the National Public Housing Museum had the day off. Thank you for coming in. But we're here to think about what the country means. And there are still people, a lot of people, maybe people in this room and people watching, who want to claim the nation and claim it in the way that Douglass claimed it for its promise of radical equality. And so, I think that's what I'm curious to know your thoughts about. And even back to the Declaration of Independence. I mean, it makes a claim of radical equality. And black folk, as soon as the ink was dry, noticed that it was a claim of radical equality within days. Of July 1776, black folk were raising their hands and raising their voices and putting in writing, all men are created equal? Sounds great. Like, we're for it. So what do you think about that? Like, is there something here for us? Is there a resource for us to claim?
That is what Nicole Hannah-Jones in her essay for the 1619 project that she won the Pulitzer Prize for, essentially argues. She describes how her father had the American flag on their home because he was a veteran, and black veterans fought for the U.S. in every war since the beginning of the nation itself. I think that with the Frederick Douglass example, I think that the end of slavery ushered in this moment of possibility in which there was a struggle over what the United States would be. And so Eric Foner, historian, describes that aftermath of Reconstruction and the what are called the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and 15th Amendment, a second founding of the United States, one in which black people are included as citizens for the first time, as people, not property. And I think that there is a struggle over what the United States will be, which I think is important to recognize, because all too often that history is flattened, where people think that there was a Civil War, there was something called Reconstruction, and then there were Jim Crow laws and 100 years of racial apartheid in the American South. And, the large arc is largely correct, but I do think that it's important to recognize that there was a struggle over what the United States would be, and that the radical Republicans, those who upheld the idea that black people should be citizens and should have the rights of citizenship, were defeated in that battle. And that basically there was what can, I think, only be described as a counter-revolution in the United States to really overthrow the second founding. And that was by the use of military coups, where there were black elected representatives in the U.S. Congress, in places like Mississippi, in South Carolina, in North Carolina, basically where black people, were, after slavery set themselves down, could vote and voted in elected representatives. And by force, by military force, by force of arms, in many cases removed from political office in Vicksburg, Mississippi, in South Carolina, in North Carolina, where there were what they called fusion coalitions that brought together poor black people and poor white people who called themselves populist, who took over state government and were overthrown, like a coup, And so when they performed these coups, they also went and changed the state constitutions that disenfranchised black people in total, but also disenfranchised hundreds of thousands of poor white people as well, to make sure that that mistake could never be recreated. And so I think that is the shortcoming in the analysis that, or the conclusion that Frederick Douglass draws, is that he becomes content, or he accepts the formal equality of black people before the law without recognizing that formal equality was never going to be enough. And every attempt to try to enhance that formal equality, because of the recognition that there was such fierce opposition to that, from elite white supremacists who then, through violence and all sorts of means, tried to undermine the position of Black people across the South, that the most powerful institutions in the United States reject that, the most powerful of them being the US Supreme Court, which, very similar, again, to today, has a number of decisions in the late 19th century that also gut the power of those Reconstruction amendments, particularly the 14th Amendment, and the rights of equal representation before the law, in particular, that they gut those. And the Supreme Court says in a ruling, I believe in 1881, that at some point, Black people have to stop seeing themselves as the special ward of the state. And they have to stop asking for special favors and see themselves as in special rights. And they have to stand up on their own 2 feet. In the midst of military coups that are throwing them out of political office, in the midst of mob violence that are committing mass murder, like the Colfax Massacre in Louisiana, in Mississippi in 1866, dozens of Black people are killed by mobs of marauding mobs of white supremacists. In North Carolina in 1898, on the cusp of the 20th century, in Wilmington, North Carolina, white mob violence overthrows a multiracial-led government, kills dozens of white people, destroys the Black press in that town, and changes the constitution of the state so that Black people can no longer vote. And any ask to stop these attacks on Black civil rights is treated as a special right, as a special favor. And so that retreat at the threat of violence from Reconstruction is an important part of the story, that there was a struggle, that the struggle was overthrown, and that it took another struggle 100 years later to restore what had been fought for and guaranteed 100 years earlier.
Because the quirk is that the Reconstruction amendments, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, were gutted, as you say, were disregarded, but neither were they repealed.
Right.
And so for all that time, Black activists looked to them and said, wait a minute, what you have on the books is birthright citizenship. Wait a minute, what you have on the books is everyone has a right to vote. And here are all the ways that your Constitution is being violated. So this has been the pattern, to fight for the words on the paper to be made real, going all the way back to the Declaration of Independence and including the Constitution amended by us. I don't know if you saw Keeanga Brown Jackson's concurrence, but we're just a few days away from something kind of wild that happened, which is, just to catch everybody up, that 14th Amendment was almost completely overturned by the Supreme Court. I mean, just a few days ago, right? It was a narrow decision that they upheld the premise that if you're born here, you're a citizen. If you read Keeanga Brown Jackson's concurrence with the majority who upheld it, it's really interesting. It's one of the most passionate arguments for this kind of patriotic interpretation of this history of struggle for radical equality. And she points out the way Black activists fought for that 14th Amendment, knowing that they specifically wanted the language to be universal, that it was not a special thing just for them as wards of the state. We've been in this special circumstance, therefore fix it for us. No, they wanted a universal declaration of citizenship for everyone. They wanted birthright. So then the Congress starts debating, and they're like, what about the Chinaman? The Chinaman will have babies, and then the Chinaman's babies will be citizens. And they had to say, okay, yeah. And so what Keeanga Brown Jackson argues is This was, and she uses that language from Foner of the second founding, that at the second founding, the United States rejected any kind of caste system, any kind of racial hierarchy. It feels weird to say those words out loud because caste and racial hierarchy are such dominant themes of US history, and we know it was so fragile in the ways that you describe. But this is what I think a lot of folk are holding on to, is the promise.
Yes. And that is true. And I do think that we have to reject the idea of loving a nation state, right? Which is what patriotism is at the end of the day. I mean, we can say that it's important that people struggle for their right to be where they're standing still. People struggle for the right to be recognized in the eyes of the law because that is the society that we function in. But I think it's also important to say that the nation state itself is destructive, that borders are deadly, that borders kill people, and that even if we, look beyond the struggles that go on within this country for rights and to really exist, the level of destruction that the United States is responsible for on a global basis for the entirety of its emergence as a global dominant power, beginning in 1901 through this very day, is in of itself an argument against the nation state. And so you don't have to be, what does it mean to be patriotic? What does it mean to love America, right? Because people fought in wars to be able to say that they are from somewhere, that they belong. I mean, I get the idea of we belong somewhere because we built this thing with our blood, sweat, and tears. I do this thing with my students when I teach the 19th century because slavery is an abstraction. No one knows what slavery means. None of us have ever lived in a slave society. But the cotton fields, these were forests. How did the forest get cleared? Everybody grab a chainsaw and you go out and clear the forest? No, like everything that happened through the breaking of bodies to facilitate that process. People had to remove the trees. People had to make the ground possible to be planted. And then in addition to all that goes into cultivation and harvesting and all of that, that came from human labor, right?
And they had to steal the land.
Everything. And so I understand, like we, put some sweat equity, but the nation state is destructive to those inside and out of it, right? The idea that this is a thing that we have to defend, which always involves going into other people's countries, which is weird, that there is the cost of it, and then there is the cost of it, And so I want nothing to do with claiming the United States in some patriotic fashion. I try not to be at the airport. Some very nice woman handed my kid an American flag, and I didn't set it on fire, and I didn't lose my mind.
Probably wouldn't get on your flight.
But I thought may have crossed my mind. But but I just it's like, to me it's this there's this idea, people talk about someone like Lyndon Johnson, for example, and how he, championed the war on poverty, and then, championed the Great Society, and finally the inclusion. Did I knock this down? The inclusion of Black people in the social welfare state, and this is such an important accomplishment. He was pushed by the civil rights movement. It's like, you cannot be for Black people in the United States while you are carpet bombing brown people in Vietnam. And so I just reject the idea that Lyndon Johnson is someone we should celebrate because his actions led to the mass murder of millions of Vietnamese because he signed the fucking Great Society legislation that he was forced to do to try to rein in the emergent, exploding Black liberation movement.
I mean, that actually, to me, gets back to the radical equality of the Declaration of Independence, because if you take it seriously and translate it from men to everybody, to all people, if all people truly are created equal, then you can't carpet bomb the Vietnamese. And often the way we're taught to think about U.S. history or things we're going to hold up on July 4th are about these successes of treating people better within the borders and not thinking about what the flag means to people on the business end of those bombs.
But even the better treatment has never come because one of these monsters was like, oh, the people should be treated better. It has always come at a point at which the struggle can no longer be contained by them. And so as a way to appease people, as a way to deflect people's anger, as a way to absorb people's anger, they have, implemented this or that thing that we look to as progress. That should be, it's not that should be ignored. It's to understand what the mechanism is. That our sense of what is progressive in the United States, to the extent that there has been progress in the United States, which is undoubtedly, again, students, I'm like in a seminar I had this crazy turn of events where I had a seminar with 15 Black women, and, this was like in 2017 at Princeton about public policy, race and public policy. And it just so happened that it was like 15 Black women and one Latino dude. And they're all going on, there's no progress, nothing has changed. And I'm looking around like, what are you talking about? There's like, I'm teaching the class, and there are no white people in the class.
At Princeton?
At Princeton. We can say it's not enough progress, but, you gotta admit when there's been some damn progress. And so you can talk about how the progress was achieved, that it comes through, but that it comes through struggle and not because the elites have decided they no longer wish to oppress people in the same way.
Okay, but on the state, let me push on something, or just raise maybe a contradiction, is the state as the nation's embodiment, and you're saying, understandably, want nothing to do with it, don't want to hold that up, don't want to celebrate it. It has these death-dealing properties, violence especially, but not exclusively abroad. It also has life-giving properties. It has scientific research, cancer studies, all kinds of things that are been dramatically reduced. It has a workforce which has been an incredible avenue, especially for Black women. I think until a few years ago, most Black women who are professionals were in the public sector, many of them in the federal government. And now there's been a purge of hundreds of thousands, a whitening of the federal workforce, and rolling back things that seem like, just from a kind of common sense public health perspective, would be functions of a nation state that you would want to preserve and maybe even support.
Yes, there are functions that government plays that have a kind of double edge to them. One is the preservation of the state and the preservation of the society organized around the state. And then there is that aspect of which is, again, responsive to struggle. Like all those features of the state that you have defined have been in response to popular uprisings and struggles, particularly the overrepresentation of Black people in the federal workforce comes directly in response to the Black movement in the 60s, which forces the expansion of the welfare state, which creates hundreds of thousands of jobs because people have to work in those offices. And I think even, if you think about something like the New Deal, which exponentially expands the bureaucratic functioning of the American state, that is in response to mass poverty and the threat of social rebellion in the shadow of the expansion of social democracy across Europe, in the near shadow of things like the Russian Revolution in the decade previous. And so in this country, just in response to the inefficiencies of the Gilded Age, right? So capitalism sometimes creates state functions that help it better to reproduce itself, right? So ending child labor, not for any particular sympathies for children, but that there's an inefficiency to that, not having any particular health standards. And so people are getting sick from filthy, disgusting food. So they impose some measures to make sure that pathogens are contained. But I think that the progressive features of the state are something that come in response to struggle. But there is the larger question of what would constitute a truly free society. Yeah. Is that a more liberal state, that is a tool that can be manipulated depending on the power or strength of a set of given forces at any moment? Because now those same features of the state, for example, the EEOC, the civil rights infrastructure that was created in response to the civil rights movement.
The equal opportunity. Oh God, what's the OC?
Equal opportunity.
Oh, say it again. Thank you. Equal Opportunity Employment Commission.
Yes.
Thank you.
1964 Civil Rights Act, an office that is intended to enforce the rules and regulations that come out of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, with different state actors in charge. That infrastructure is now being used to punish Black people, telling white men, if you've been discriminated against, meaning your company hired a Black woman instead of you, give us a call. We'll file a lawsuit. Yeah. So the state is a problem because it depends on the power of the forces that can keep it at bay or in check.
I think it's really interesting to think about this question right now, because my goodness, it sure seems like people can kind of capture the state and run away with it in wild directions. On the one hand, we have the white supremacists running away with the federal government. Right. And, I came here from Mamdanistan, New York City, where, this African-born Muslim Democratic Socialist Black Studies major is like the mayor of the largest city with like a multi-billion-dollar budget. And so you sure wouldn't be blamed for thinking in a moment like this that voting really matters. It feels like an extreme, that we're living in an age of electoral extremes.
Sure, but it's not enough. It's not enough, and it'll never be enough. And that's the problem. The scale of crisis is so profound in the United States, and the problems are such that we experience are never on the ballot, right? They're never asked. So no one asks us about $300 billion in Iran for war, but no one also asks us, what else could we do with the $300 billion? You know, like they don't ask us. Most Americans have wanted universal health care for like the last 20 years, but it's never on the ballot, right? So we can't get it. We don't get to have it. You know, there's like, most people, you know, think that people should have affordable places to live, but it's not on the ballot. We don't get that, you know? So yeah, elections, you know, elect the liberal, elect the social democrat, more power to the, you know, I'm all for it, but it's not enough, right? And that is why there's also been, you know, another tradition in the United States, because of the extraordinary inequality of, you know, really radical ideas of, you know, socialism, and the idea that the people should decide. And we should set up the mechanisms that allow for the people to decide and to determine.
An expansion of democracy.
Yes, what we should do with this enormous wealth that exists in this society. And instead, we have this really, I mean, it blows your mind if you think about it, right? The median income in the United States is something like $77,000, which in and of itself is pretty shocking. So I think for a white family, it's like $88,000. For black family, it's something like $56,000, $60,000. And so, you know, we can talk about the disparity between the $88,000, and we talk about that and compared to the $60,000. Meanwhile, there's a trillionaire who has been, you know, glorified in the press. But aside from that, the Congress is dominated by millionaires, right? Everyone in the Senate is a millionaire, at least. There's at least, I think, also one billionaire in the Senate. The president, we weren't sure if he was a billionaire before he got into office, but he's definitely a billionaire now. He's made $2 billion in the last 16 months. Nice work if you can get it. The House, half of the House is worth $1 million. I think the average is $954,000. So you have people, our elected representatives, are literally in the House making 10 times, or they own 10 times the you know, what people make in a year. So you have millionaires who are making decisions about what people who are barely breaking even have to live on. So these are the people who think that when people are making decisions between prescriptions and rent, that's just an urban legend, that doesn't actually happen, right? There's horrible man, George H.W. Bush, who was president after Reagan, famously goes into a grocery store and has no idea how there's a scanner at the grocery store and what that is and what is the cost of milk these days, you know? And that's what we're run by, these patricians who have and this is democracy. This is American democracy, where you get to have millionaires and a couple of billionaires make decisions about the lives of people, all of whom make under $100,000. You know, the average person making well under $100,000 a year. It's absurd. Yeah. It's absurd.
I think there's you're right. There's a tradition of radical democracy, of bottom-up organizing, of people trying to take greater power and control, and it is not always viewed as part of this. It's not viewed as a democratic tradition. It's like, oh, these people are communists or socialists, therefore they're some brand of authoritarians. Mm-hmm. They're not actually people who are trying to expand democracy, expand the power of ordinary people. I think it's interesting that we've seen some grassroots explosions in the past years that I've found tremendously inspiring. Most recently in Minneapolis, like the way people just straight up defended their neighbors, like no matter what, was incredible. And I'm wondering, what are these seeds of grassroots democracy organizing that you see today that you find inspiring?
I mean, Minneapolis was pretty fantastic. I think, and there are lots of reasons why, but one of the reasons I think about in particular was that it came during a time where there's like, where are the protests? Where are the protests? The scale of attack from the Trump administration has been so spectacular, like huge, but the protests have not, matched the same energy. If you think about the first Trump administration, there were more demonstrations against Trump 2017 to 2021 than any other presidency in history. But there were over 65,000 demonstrations in that 4-year period. And you compare that to the much more well-organized machine that has been this second administration. It's kind of like, well, what is happening? And so the Minnesota response to Trump was important as an exercise in solidarity. I think as an exercise in really what a local movement can look like in multiple ways. They had huge marches in below zero Minnesota winter. Yeah. They were extremely disciplined with a completely out of control police force that was trying to provoke a certain kind of confrontation, which would have given Trump the authority to, declare martial law, to call in the military. And so it was really a model of what we should be doing. And so much so that, it's really frightening to think that ICE, if people don't know this, have arrested 10,000 people in the last 5 days. And they've completely changed their tactics because of the Minnesota response, where they realized that if you don't provoke a confrontation, you can be much more efficient. And so it means that we have to, adjust. But I just think that it's, to me, one of the most kind of significant aspects of that is it really was a demonstration in how people can be together, So there's solidarity, but it's also, there was just a lot of what they describe as neighborliness, and how do we sort of generalize from that? How do we take that aspect of their struggle and kind of infuse that into the organizing that we're doing?
And what does it mean for how we look at what's possible here in this land? I think that there's always been people who are okay with white supremacy, with authoritarianism, with the coups, with the counter-revolution to overthrow radical Reconstruction, with the Klan. And there's, that percentage of people who were willing to vote for Trump 3 times. And people in Minneapolis stood up for their neighbors and fought for them. And so I feel like this is a country where we have both traditions. We have traditions of solidarity, of people embracing each other's humanity and linking arms across difference in ways that are really powerful and inspiring. And we have people who believe in hierarchy and supremacy, and that all people are not created equal.
Well, that's why there's a struggle, right? That's why after the Civil War, there's a struggle to determine what the future will look like. And there'll be a struggle here, too, over what the future will look like. But the thing is, I think that if white supremacy, if racism, if xenophobia, if all these things actually worked for people, then we'd have a problem, But it doesn't. And I think that, blaming immigrants is a well-worn tradition, and it's easy to do. Blaming Black people and the idea that the federal government has put its thumb on the scales to help Black people while ignoring white people, as Vance and Trump say. You can tell that story for a while. You can even tell it for 10 years. You can tell it through 3 presidential elections. And then at some point, it doesn't add up. At some point, somehow Trump makes $2 billion in a 16-month period. And you're still dealing with the effects of inflation. And now everything costs even more. Because that's the inflation trick, is the inflation goes down, but the inflated prices stay up, right? Because the gas companies have realized, well, they won't riot if we charge them $4 a gallon. So we'll just leave it up, They'll still buy eggs. Maybe we won't have them be $7 a dozen. Maybe we'll just charge them $5. And meanwhile, your wages don't work the same way. Yeah. So, the problem is that those arguments, they have to be organized, right? Like, people, you can tell a story that explains these sorts of hardships that people keep believing. So, there are polls that are kind of all over the place, but one of the places where it has stayed pretty reactionary is around the question of immigration. And that's for Black people who express anti-immigrant ideas, white people who express anti-immigrant ideas, and of course Latinos who express anti-immigrant ideas. And there's been, people don't like the Gestapo tactics, which is why they've changed them, but they still do question, is the presence of immigrants here in a period of high inflation, austerity, affecting me negatively? And so you have to have something to say about that. And I saw this, I've been looking at a lot of polling and like one of the craziest things, one of the craziest things I saw was that there are more Black people who like Nick Fuentes than any other demographic. So 16% compared.
Remind our viewers.
He's
who
a
Nick
white
Fuentes
supremacist. the internet, YouTube hosts a daily show, is just like a hardcore neo-Nazi white supremacist, but leans much more into anti-Semitism, and makes that the kind of public face of his anti-Semitism, or it's his racism, than his anti-black insanity. And so, you know, the other thing is that the polls reflect the fluidity and scattered nature of people's thoughts as well, which means that, you know, ideologically, people are open to all sorts of things. And so that is a call for the left and progressives and people who care about things and want to change things to actually be organized in such a way as to speak to those people, and to involve them in something that has a vision of what a better life could look like. And there are all sorts of, I mean, that is the other tradition here. And, you know, I have a magazine called Hammer and Hope, and we just did a special edition for this ridiculous anniversary. And, you know, we called it 250 Years of White Supremacy. But one of the things when we were writing the kind of opening note that introduces the magazine, I thought it was really important that that's not all of what the history is, right? That it's not just, I mean, there's a kind of thread of white supremacy that most certainly runs the course of American history. But there's also been 250 years of resistance. There's been 250 years of struggle. And it's important to capture that, to talk about that, because that is a tradition that is important and to be proud of, and that has nothing to do with patriotism. In fact, it's almost all about resisting what the nation state is and what it tries to do to people in this country and beyond it.
Well, maybe we should.
To the people?
Yeah.
In the spirit of democracy.
Are we doing Q&A, questions from the audience? Let's take some. Or comments?
This audience is all like, fuck the USA.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the nation state. Hello, it's nice to be in conversation with you all. I'm Demetrius, PhD student at Northwestern in history. We share an academic advisor, Mark Keeanga. My question is around this idea of the nation state, and I hold some of the same critiques. But I want to put it in conversation to an international lens, not just the United States. As we see the climate disaster really kick into overdrive, and you see what's going on in Venezuela and some other places. In this thought of the construction, you know, Westphalia, right, the creation of the nation state and borders, and who can travel where and who can't travel. In this next iteration of where we're trying to go and what is on the horizon, how does that further shape your thoughts around the nation state?
What do you mean?
I'm talking about in terms of migration, forced migration because of climate change.
Let me just restate this for those viewing at home remotely. Demetrius asks about the forced migration due to climate change, and what is that going to do to nation states and borders and that?
As we're seeing heightening xenophobia.
Yes, heightening xenophobia, yeah.
Well, I mean, to me, and you know, I'd be curious to know what you think. It just sort of heightens the problem of the border, right? Like we have this globe that we share. That's what we learned from COVID, right? Is that we're all in this one world together, and the impacts of climate, which we are seeing now, right? So someone told me that, it's my spouse, that the heat dome, we just left, we live in Philadelphia, and we left to come here for the weekend. And so the heat index in Philly today is 113 degrees. And so there's like, this is impossible without climate change. It's just, I don't know if people know, 1,000 people died in France in a 2-week period because of heat. In Germany, it was 107 degrees for like 4 or 5 consecutive days. And you know, in Europe, there's no air conditioning. I don't know if you've been. There's no air conditioning. There's no ice. You know, if you ask for ice, it's like, oh, an American, you know. So this is real, you know, and this is the quote unquote, you know, developed world. And so elsewhere, the borders are killing people, you know, like the climate migration is a real thing. And, you know, countries throwing up the drawbridge, and this is killing people. Yeah. And so, if anything, it reinforces the idea that the nation state should not be revered. It is a tool of death and destruction that, you know, should be the object of political struggle, not embrace.
I think we've held up in the U.S. those countries that have more social democratic norms. They have universal health care. We look on with envy at their paid vacations and their paternal leave and maternal leave and all of these policies that make it hard to end up on the street in the way that it's easy to in the United States. But we also have seen that those kind of societies, those more social democratic societies, also can be deeply xenophobic. And that their view of those policies can be, yeah, all this good stuff is for us and not for you. And so, yeah.
Which is even more despicable when you think about where they got the money to create these robust social welfare states was from colonialism, but also they were able to produce that in response to massive struggles of working class people across Europe. So even in the social democracies, you know, it's not like they have more enlightened governments, and that's why they have generous welfare states. These were in response to class struggle, but it was also, they were able to do that because of colonialism. And now, when the colonized subjects are seeking to escape the arid landscape that has been created through colonial extraction, then they're told you're not welcome here. And so racism, it takes, you know, it's different forms based on history and traditions and all the rest of it, but it comes from the same kinds of practices, from slavery to colonialism to its aftermath that we are seeing now.
We have this problem that the only sphere to try to enforce or practice some kind of democratic politics, the greatest scale at which we can try to do it, is at the scale of the nation state. We don't have a way. And now we're facing an existential crisis on the globe, and the entities that have to try to resolve that crisis are nation states that are competing with each other.
And they have nothing to say about it. Like, it's astounding.
It's astounding. We don't have, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. Finish your thought.
No, I was just gonna say, it's like, to me, it's like we know, we have the evidence, we've had the idea that we're all equal. We've had this idea has been spoken since before 1776. Like, it's there. We know this, but we have not organized ourselves in a way to make it true. And to result, and so we have these things that end up being kind of like cousins, like racism and nationalism, that make it really hard now to resolve something that's coming at us full force.
Okay, my name is Lisa. Hi, so nice to be here. I actually work for the federal government. Oddly enough, I work for the VA. I'm a therapist, social worker. But thank you. It was really nice to be here with you. I guess I've been thinking a lot, sort of in the context of like what borders mean. Also, right when we're looking at like we're clamping down on our borders in the U.S., but ignoring everyone else's borders and sovereignty.
Yeah.
Right? So I guess
Funny how that works.
Yeah. But like, I guess I just think about like, I've been listening to like a lot of podcasts about sovereignty being, like the kidnapping of Maduro, right?
Yeah.
Like, just ignoring the sovereignty of that state or Iran or literally any other government, right? Like we're bombing Ecuador right now. We're bombing God knows how many places, right? There's military bases all over the world, U.S. military bases all over the world. And I guess it's just sort of like, I think the U.S. doesn't really have borders. We're everywhere. Like we're like a global hegemon, right? So like, and I think that's like, we think of it, and it's really just like the protection of like the imperial core, like even that's going away with like the dissolution of NATO, right? So, and like Trump threatening Greenland, right? Like obviously he backed off, but I just think he's escalated what's already been happening, right? But I guess I'm wondering what you think about that, like, what does a nation state actually mean from like, you know what I mean? Like the U.S. doesn't really, the borders are only to protect like white supremacy, essentially, I would say.
Let me restate again for the audio, Lisa, a federal worker. Well, mention your last name. Or which department.
I'm gonna say Hatch Act violation, probably.
Well, happens to be in the audience, is pointing out the contradiction between the United States flagrantly and outrageously violating the self-determination and borders of other, going in and kidnapping a leader of another country while throwing up walls and trying to stop people from crossing its borders, and asking, what does this mean what does it mean? What does the nation state even mean in this kind of, where some kinds of actions cross borders and violate self-determination and
I think that's the way we've always operated, but it's just escalating, right? And I don't know. Yeah.
It means whatever the strength of your military allows it to mean, and that is what the U.S. is doing right now is using naked force, foregoing any sense of diplomacy, to do what it wants to do because it can. And if anything, it has removed the varnish. I think Mark Carney talked about this. He's the was it Prime Minister of Canada, who talked about how Trump had basically ripped off the mask of diplomacy and this idea of international coordination through the G7.
Rules-based international order.
Yeah. That actually it's just brute force. And, Trump had the, I don't know if just like, we have this huge military. Why aren't we using it? We have these nuclear weapons. Why aren't we threatening to use it to get whatever it is we want? And it has helped to expose this is really how the world is run, not through summits. And if anything, the UN, somebody should turn that building into condos, because what the hell is it? The United Nations, right? It is a figment of our imagination, because we see who's running the world. It's whoever's got the biggest military, and that is the United States.
I think we have time for one more. Yeah, sir.
Hi. Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
my name is Juan. Thank you want to say you had a defense of the nation state when you said that there were certain positives that come out of it. I would say that a lot of those come from the military. It's a trickle down from a lot of the military work that gets done, research. So how do you deal with being in academia? How do you deal with the contradiction of the funding that goes to the universities versus what the negatives of the nation state?
Let me restate again. Juan asks about the fact that a lot of the positives of the nation state, some scientific research and things like that, many of them are downstream of military funding, and a lot of that has been linked historically, I think especially through the middle of the 20th century, to the expansion of higher education and the kind of merger of higher education with the military and military funding.
I mean, I think every job is filled with contradictions, and you know, the U.S. So I don't feel any particular, you know, anything. I have a job. I got hired. I do my job, and then I go home. You know, I don't feel any particular thing about it. That's what I do. Go to work, go home, you know, yeah.
Repeat. Well, thank you, Juan. Thank you, National Public Housing Museum. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you for watching at home. You want to say something?
So we have copies of both Keeanga-'s books and a few of Keeanga's books outside, and Brian's brilliant book that I'm sure they'd be happy to sign for you. And we have snacks and drinks that people are welcome to hang out and mingle. So thank you so much.
Enjoy the fireworks.
Man. That was.
It's just hot with the lights and everything. Just a quick announcement. If the restrooms are downstairs, in case you need them, there are multiple restrooms downstairs. All right? Thanks.
Ai lelo na lebi oyangani ngai soki malamine soni te vraiment ozali koyangana ngai ai bozoba na yo omengo lingaki komona na ngai kawo bebisi